All right, welcome to another deep dive. You know how this works. We take the sources you send us and we try to pull out the good stuff, the really interesting stuff.
Yeah, kind of cut through the noise.
Exactly. Cut through the noise, get to the heart of it. And today we have, well, this is kind of interesting. It's a YouTube transcript, actually.
Oh, wow. So we're diving into the world of online learning.
We are. This one's a university lecture. The title is a mouthful. It's A230A Fall 2024. Thurin 323 Romantics, Shelley 1.
Romantics. Okay. So we're talking poetry, literature.
You got it. From a channel called Happy Learning. It's all about the romantic poet, Percy Bysshe Shelley.
Oh, interesting. I've heard the name, of course, but I'm not super familiar with his work.
Well, you're in the right place. That's the whole point of these deep dives.
Huh?
This one is going to center on the discussion around Shelley and two of his poems, To a Skylark and Ode to the West Wind.
Sounds great.
Yeah,
I always find it helpful to have that kind of context before diving into poetry.
totally. And, romantic poetry can be pretty complex sometimes.
Mm.
This deep dive should give us, and all of our listeners, of course, a good grasp of Shelley's work and some of the bigger ideas within romantic poetry. So, ready to jump in.
Let's do it.
Okay. So, right off the bat, the professor introduces Shelley's life, and it's pretty interesting.
In what way?
Well, the professor kind of compares Shelley to Wordsworth, who lived a very long life, right?
Ah, I see. So he had lots of time to, I don't know, refine his work.
Right, and to, really go back and rework things. Shelley, on the other hand, he died quite young. He didn't have that luxury.
That's a shame. I mean, in terms of like his artistic development, that must have had an impact.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what the lecture really emphasizes. This idea that Shelley's early death had a big effect on, his legacy.
I see. Because he wasn't able to, curate his own work in the same way that someone like Wordsworth could.
Precisely. And because of that, because he died so young, his wife had to step in. She became his editor, which is pretty significant when you think about it.
That's a huge responsibility. It wasn't just, fixing grammar or spelling.
Right. It went way beyond that. She actually had
Yeah.
to justify some of his views,
You?
his political views. He was very radical for his time, and not everyone agreed with him, to say the least. So his wife ended up writing these prefaces to later editions of his work, kind of explaining things.
Trying to smooth things over, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that gives us some important context, right? Like, how should we approach his poems knowing this?
It's like a lens, almost.
Uh,
We have to view his work through this lens of his radicalism and the fact that his wife felt the need to explain his views.
Right. And that leads us to, well, a bigger discussion of romantic poetry itself.
Makes sense.
Because to understand Shelley, we kind of have to understand Romanticism as a whole.
Of course. So what does the professor say about that?
Well, the lecture highlights some key characteristics, things to look for in romantic poetry.
Okay, like what?
Well, first off, there's this huge emphasis on emotions and feelings, like the inner world of the individual.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then there's this profound connection with nature.
Oh yeah, the Romantics loved nature, didn't they?
They really did. It was a huge source of inspiration for them. And then there's individualism, celebrating the unique person.
Right, and their imagination. That was a big deal for the Romantics, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Imagination was central to their work. They really believed in its power. And the professor actually makes this little side note about how to refer to William Wordsworth.
Oh, interesting. Why?
Just to be clear, to be accurate, you can call him William Wordsworth, that's fine.
Okay.
Or just Wordsworth,
Makes sense.
but not just William.
I can see why. Wouldn't want to mix them up with, I don't know, Shakespeare.
Exactly. It's a small detail, but it really shows you, the importance of being precise in these kinds of academic discussions.
It makes sense. Precision is key when you're talking about literature and authors. So where do we go from there?
Well, then the lecture introduces 4 Shelley poems.
Okay, what are they?
They are To a Skylark, Ode to the West Wind, England in 1819, and Ozymandias.
Okay, so a good mix. But we're focusing on the first 2 for this deep dive.
That's right. The first part of the lecture centers on To a Skylark, and then Ode to the West Wind.
Got it.
So let's start with To a Skylark.
Oh,
And the first thing they do in the lecture is, they try to figure out what the poem is about.
What's the subject?
Exactly. And the poet's overall attitude towards it.
I see. What do they come up with?
Well, pretty quickly, it becomes clear that the poem is an address to a skylark.
A skylark, like the bird.
The bird. A tiny little songbird, actually.
Interesting.
And right away, there's this sense of, praise.
Praise for the bird.
Yeah, for the skylark and its sweet voice, as Shelley puts it.
Okay. I'm curious, how does he praise it?
Well, one thing the lecture points out is this comparison between the skylark singing and the act of writing poetry.
Oh, I see. Both are forms of expression, of creativity.
Exactly. They're both seen as musical, as ways of communicating something.
And I bet Shelley is really drawn to that natural, effortless way the skylark sings.
Oh, you know it. There's this one part, it's amazing, where Shelley writes, "Teach us, sprite or bird, what sweet thoughts are thine. I have never heard praise of love or wine that panted forth a flood of rapture so divine."
Wow. I mean, he's really in awe of this bird.
Completely. He's captivated by the skylark song. It's so pure, so joyful, and it seems to come so naturally to the bird.
Which is, of course, very different from the way we humans often create, right?
Absolutely. The lecture brings up this contrast that Shelley makes between the skylark song, which is free from sadness and worry, and human poetry, which, often deals with pain and struggle.
That's so interesting. It's like he's saying true art should be effortless, like the bird's song. It shouldn't have to come from suffering.
That's a really good point. It's a kind of ideal, maybe, that he's putting forward.
Like the skylark becomes a teacher almost.
Right, and nature becomes this source of wisdom that we can learn from.
That's a classic romantic idea. Nature is the ultimate teacher.
It really is. And, the poem keeps coming back to this contrast between the natural world, represented by the skylark, and the artificial world, the world of the poet and his poems.
I see. And the skylark is free, right? It doesn't have to struggle to create beauty. It just does.
Exactly. And that's something the poet clearly admires. And then there's this little detail the professor points out about the poem's form. The lines are irregular. They're different lengths.
Ah, okay. Like not a strict rhyme scheme or meter.
Right. And the professor mentions that this is something you see a lot in romantic poetry. It's like they're breaking free from those strict rules, embracing a more natural, organic form.
Which makes total sense, given their love of nature and all things wild and free.
It really does. So to sum up to a skylark, it seems like the main idea is this. Nature is a powerful source of inspiration, and the skylark represents this pure, effortless form of artistic expression.
That's a great takeaway.
Okay, so ready for the next poem?
Hit me with it.
Ode to the West Wind.
Okay. Just the title itself is interesting.
Right. The professor actually starts by asking, what do you think of when you hear west wind?
Well, I guess I think of autumn, the leaves changing, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And the lecture points out that the poem, at least initially, presents the west wind as a force of destruction.
Destruction. Like the end of things.
Yeah, like the end of a cycle. The leaves are falling, turning yellow, everything's dying.
Okay, yeah. That's a very different vibe than the Skylark poem.
Definitely. But there's a twist.
What do you mean?
Well, the lecture emphasizes that the west wind is also a bringer of new life.
Oh, I see. It's like that saying, destruction breeds creation.
Precisely. It's paradoxical. The west wind destroys to create, like the end of one cycle has to happen for a new one to begin. The professor even uses the example of death and birth, which is pretty powerful imagery.
Yeah, very powerful. So it's not just destruction, it's renewal, too.
Exactly. And the poem keeps developing this idea. The west wind is changing the atmosphere, the ecosystem, making everything, well, kind of morbid, as the lecture says.
Morbid, like deathly.
Yeah, but that death is necessary for rebirth. It's all part of the cycle.
Wow. Okay, so we've got this powerful force of nature, both destructive and creative.
And then there's this really interesting shift. The poet starts to identify with the west wind.
In what way?
Well, he wants the wind to carry his thoughts, his poetry, across the universe like the wind scatters leaves.
Oh, interesting. Why?
He wants his words to, and this is a direct quote, quicken a new birth. He wants his poetry to have a lasting impact, to be remembered.
Ah, I see. He wants to achieve a kind of immortality through his work. And it's almost like he's linking his poetry to the natural world, to this powerful force of nature.
That's a great observation. It's like he's saying that nature and art are intertwined. And, we have to remember that Shelley was seen as pretty radical. So the fact that these ideas are coming through in poetry that focuses on nature, it's pretty fascinating, right?
Definitely.
And then there's this line, use me as thy lyre.
Whoa. Okay,
Oh.
so he wants to be the instrument the wind plays.
Yeah. He wants to be completely swept up in that power. It's a very powerful image.
Totally. Like he's surrendering to something bigger than himself.
Exactly. And then we get to the end of that section, and the lecture really focuses on these lines. Drive my dead thoughts over the universe like withered leaves to quicken a new birth. And by the incantation of this verse, scatter, as from an unextinguished hearth, Ashes and sparks, my words among mankind, be through my lips to unawakened earth the trumpet of a prophecy.
Wow, those are powerful words.
They really are. And the professor points out that this is where the poet sees himself as a prophet, almost.
Yeah.
His words are like a prophecy that the wind will spread.
It's a huge vision, like he's trying to awaken humanity with his poetry.
And then we get to the very end of the poem, and there's this shift in tone again. It becomes more hopeful.
Really?
Yeah. The last lines are, "O wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind?"
Okay, so even after all that destruction, there's hope.
Precisely. It's like that cyclical idea coming back again. Winter has to happen for spring to arrive.
Right, there's always renewal.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive. So we started with Shelley's life, his political views, and the context surrounding his work.
And then we talked about romanticism as a whole, some of those key characteristics.
Exactly. And then we got into those two amazing poems, To a Skylark and Ode to the West Wind.
And we saw nature as a source of inspiration in the first poem, and then as this destructive but also creative force in the second.
Right. And I think this lecture really gives us a good understanding of these poems and of Shelley himself.
It's a great starting point for anyone who wants to dive deeper into romanticism.
Totally. So here's a question for you, for all our listeners, actually. The Romantics were obsessed with nature, with its beauty and its power. We're still grappling with those ideas today, especially with all the environmental concerns we're facing. So how do these two poems by Shelley, with their contrasting views of nature, how do they reflect our own complex relationship with the natural world?
That's a great question. It's definitely something to think about.
It is. We encourage you to explore that idea further and maybe even check out some of Shelley's other works. The world of Romanticism is vast and fascinating. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.